He was running across the hottest desert on Earth when the wind started to scream. In minutes, the world turned white with sand. He couldn't see his own hands. When the storm cleared, the race was gone. No people, no landmarks, no direction. Only endless sand, and a silence so deep it felt alive. What happened over the next 9 days is so unbelievable. Even he can't explain how he's still here to tell it. This is the story of Mauro Prosperi. And trust me, you're not going to believe where this goes. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because this channel is all about the most incredible survival stories you've never heard. And believe me, this one's going to stay with you. So here's how it all started. April 1994, southern Morocco. Mauro Prosperi, a 39-year-old Italian police officer, an experienced marathon runner, decided to tackle one of the most brutal races on the planet, the Marathon des Sables. Now, if you don't know what that is, picture this. A 6-day, 156-mile ultramarathon straight through the Sahara Desert. Yeah, people actually volunteer for this torture. Mauro wasn't some weekend warrior either. The guy had run multiple marathons, knew his limits, and came prepared. He had his compass, his emergency supplies, everything you're supposed to have. But here's the thing about the Sahara. It doesn't care how prepared you think you are. On day 4 of the race, Mauro was actually doing pretty well. He was making good time across the endless dunes when the wind started picking up. At first, it was just annoying. You know, sand getting in your eyes, that kind of thing. But then it got serious. Fast. Within minutes, what started as a breeze turned into a full-blown sandstorm. And I'm not talking about the kind of dust storm you might see in Arizona. This was a Saharan haboob, a wall of sand so thick and violent that it can literally bury entire villages. When the world disappears. Okay, so picture this. You're running across what's basically an alien landscape, and suddenly you can't see 3 feet in front of you. The wind is howling like a freight train, and sand is hitting your face like tiny bullets. Mauro did what any sane person would do. He stopped running and tried to wait it out. But here's where things get really bad. The storm lasted for 8 hours. 8 hours of being sandblasted while crouched behind his backpack, trying not to suffocate. When it finally cleared, Mauro looked around and nothing. The race markers were gone. The other runners were gone. Even his own footprints had been erased. Now, most people would panic right about here. But Mauro was experienced enough to know that panicking kills you faster than anything else in the desert. So he pulled out his compass, picked what he thought was the right direction, and started walking. Problem was, his compass was broken. The sandstorm had damaged it, and he had no idea. For the first day, Mauro wasn't too worried. He figured he'd catch up to the race eventually, or someone would find him. He had some water, some emergency food, and hey, how far could he really be from the course? Well, as it turns out, pretty damn far. The search for anything by day 2, reality started setting in. Mauro was walking for hours in what he thought was the right direction, but all he saw was more sand. Endless, rolling dunes that looked exactly like the last 100 he'd climbed over. The heat was unbearable, easily over 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and his water was running low. Here's where the desert really starts messing with your head. When you're that dehydrated and overheated, you start seeing things. Mirages aren't just shimmering water in the distance, they're full-blown hallucinations. Mauro started seeing cities on the horizon, rescue helicopters that weren't there, even people waving at him from distant dunes. By day 3, his water was gone. Completely gone. And this is where survival gets ugly. Because when you're dying of thirst in the desert, you'll do anything for moisture. Anything. Mauro started drinking his own urine. Yeah, I know how that sounds. But when it's that, or death, you make the choice. Now, drinking urine isn't actually as helpful as most people think. Your kidneys filter out waste for a reason, and putting that waste back in your system just speeds up the poisoning process. But when you're desperate, your brain tells you it's better than nothing. The shrine in the sand on day 4. Just when Mauro thought he was going to die of thirst, he saw something impossible. Rising out of the sand like a mirage that wouldn't disappear, was a small building. As he got closer, he realized it was an abandoned Islamic shrine. A marabout, probably centuries old. Inside, it was like stepping into another world. The walls were covered in Arabic inscriptions, and there were old prayer rugs scattered on the floor. But more importantly, it was shelter from the sun. For the first time in days, Mauro could rest without being slowly cooked alive. But here's where this story takes a turn that most people can't handle. Mauro was starving. Literally starving. And there was no food anywhere. That's when he noticed something moving in the shadows of the shrine. Bats. Lots of bats hanging from the ceiling. Now, think about this for a second. You're a civilized person, a police officer from Italy, and suddenly you're staring at a bunch of bats thinking, that's dinner. It's one of those moments where survival strips away everything you thought you knew about yourself. Crossing the line, Mauro caught the bats with his bare hands. He ate them raw, blood and all. He drank their blood because it was the only liquid he could find. Can you imagine? A few days earlier, he was probably eating pasta with his family, and now he is drinking bat blood to stay alive in an abandoned shrine in the middle of nowhere. The bats kept him alive for 2 more days, but they couldn't solve his biggest problem. He still had no idea where he was, and every hour in the desert was slowly killing him. The sun had burnt his skin so badly that it was cracking and bleeding. His lips were split open, his tongue was swollen, and he could barely think straight. By day 6, Mauro was barely human anymore. He was stumbling through the desert like a zombie, hallucinating constantly, talking to people who weren't there. And that's when he made a decision that still haunts him today. He decided to kill himself. Mauro found a piece of broken glass and tried to slit his wrists. But here's the thing about severe dehydration. Your blood gets so thick that it barely flows. He couldn't even bleed enough to die. The desert wouldn't even let him quit on his own terms. The impossible walk, so there he was. Failed suicide attempt, dying of thirst, burned alive by the sun, and for some reason, he kept walking. Maybe it was training, maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was something deeper than that. But Mauro got up and kept moving. For 3 more days, he walked. 3 days of pure willpower, and nothing else. His feet were destroyed, his body was shutting down, and his mind was completely gone. But he kept putting one foot in front of the other. On day 9, Mauro saw something that he was sure was another hallucination. In the distance, there were people. Real people. A Tuareg nomad family had spotted this walking corpse stumbling through their territory and came to investigate. When they found him, Mauro had lost 40 pounds. 40 pounds in 9 days. His body weight had dropped by almost a quarter. The nomads didn't even recognize him as human at first. They thought he was some kind of desert ghost. The final calculation, here's the part that blows my mind. When the rescue teams finally figured out where Mauro was, he wasn't just a little off course. He was 180 miles away from where he'd started. 180 miles in the wrong direction. He had accidentally walked from Morocco into Algeria, crossing an international border without even knowing it. Think about that for a second. The guy got so lost that he ended up in a completely different country. If those nomads hadn't found him, he would have kept walking until he died, and no one would have ever known what happened to him. The doctors who treated Mauro said it was medically impossible for him to have survived. 9 days without water in the Sahara Desert should have killed him 3 times over. The fact that he was still walking when they found him defied every medical textbook they'd ever read. What the desert teaches. So what does a story like this teach us? I mean, besides the obvious lesson of not running ultramarathons through the world's most dangerous desert. Maybe it's about the difference between surviving and living. For 9 days, Mauro wasn't really living. He was just refusing to die. When he got back to Italy, people asked him if he'd ever run another desert race. You know what he said, of course. 2 years later, he was back in the Sahara, running the same race. Because some people, when they stare death in the face and somehow walk away, they don't run from it. They run toward it. The desert changed Mauro in ways that went way beyond the physical scars. He'd crossed a line that most people never even get close to. The line between civilization and pure survival. And once you've crossed that line, once you've eaten bats and drunk blood and walked 180 miles through hell itself, the regular world never looks the same again. The final mile. Mauro Prosperi went into the Sahara Desert as an Italian police officer, looking for a challenge. He came out as something else entirely. Someone who'd seen the absolute worst that nature could throw at a human being, and somehow lived to tell about it. The marathon that was supposed to take 6 days ended up taking 9. The race that should have covered 156 miles turned into a 180-mile death march through 2 countries. And the man who started as a runner ended up as a survivor, in the truest sense of the word. Every year, hundreds of people line up to run the marathon, sables, thinking they know what they're getting into. But Mauro's story reminds us that the desert doesn't care about your training, your preparation, or your plans. It only cares about one thing: whether you're really tough enough to keep walking when everything else tells you to quit. He set out to run across the desert, and ended up running for his life. And somehow, impossibly, he made it home. Thanks for watching. If this story amazed you as much as it amazed me, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. Could you have survived 9 days alone in the Sahara? And don't forget to subscribe, because we've got more incredible survival stories coming your way. Until next time, remember that sometimes the difference between life and death isn't about being the strongest or the smartest. Sometimes it's just about taking one more step when you think you can't take another.